Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and a good evening to Mr. Dheeraj Pandey, our distinguished speaker of the day, who's based out of Bay Area Pacific Time. And thank you for being with us on a Friday evening. I would like to thank all our viewers for joining us on a ninth lecture under the Centenary Lecture Series. Today, we have an excellent speaker, Mr. Dheeraj Pandey, who built a unicorn very early in his career. He's the co founder and ex CEO of Nutanix, and arguably one of the brightest minds of the world has seen in the field of IT over the last few decades. I would also like to acknowledge the presence of our director, Dr. Dheeraj Sanghi, today. The event will be hosted by our own alum, Manish Arora, who graduated from PEC in the year 2001 from Computer Science and Engineering. He's currently working on solving the unemployability problem for Indian graduates and has demonstrated history of managing businesses for profitability and taking them from zero to one as well, 1 to 100. He's a global professional with an MBA from Instead and 19 plus years of experience spanning globe. Without further ado, let me now hand over to our host, Mr. Manish, who will formally introduce our speaker, Mr. Dheeraj Pandey. Over to you, Manish.
Thank you, Dr. Bansal, and hello, everyone. First of all, at PEC, we are all very proud to be hosting the visionary leader, Dheeraj Pandey, who's co-founder of Nutanix. There's a lot that can be said about Dheeraj, but I'll try to keep it short. His company, Nutanix, is an industry-leading cloud computing company. He's a member of the board of advisors and at the Department of CS at UT Austin, as well as a board member of Adobe. He completed his bachelor's in CS from IIT Kanpur in 1997, where he was honored with the Distinguished Alumnus Award for his exceptional performance. He's also been awarded Dell's Founder 50 and the E&Y Entrepreneur of the Year, Silicon Valley, for his inspiring entrepreneurial drive. Dheeraj is known as someone who's able to foresee technological trends of the future. And today he's going to share with us some vignettes from career and company building experiences. As I was doing my research on Dheeraj, I learned so many things about him. His perspectives on learning, sharing, importance of values, balance, and most of all, on being a good human being are things that we can all learn from. I must confess that I've been excited as a kid going to a candy shop about this session, and I'm pretty sure that is the case for everyone else too. So I'll pass on the microphone to Dheeraj without further ado. Over to you, Dheeraj.
Thank you, Manish, and thank you, Divya, for really helping bring this whole thing together. And I am eternally grateful to Dr. Sanghi. You folks probably wouldn't know this about my life, but when I was a young kid in computer science in 1993 at IIT Kanpur, I think right around my sophomore year, Dr. Sanghi had come back from US, from Maryland College Park. And it's his passion for distributed systems and networking that made me so passionate about computer science. And I had a big fork in the road when I was graduating to go to the industry or really pursue a PhD in computer science, which I eventually dropped out of. But I think that distributed systems passion, that understanding of software and computer science deeply, how do you eventually go and make reliable, highly available systems that could be great for people, and you could also along the way build careers and families. I mean, Nutanix, when we founded it in 2009, it was a passion for distributed systems. It's about bringing a lot of the learnings from the consumer cloud companies like Google and Facebook and Amazon and others, and really bringing it to the masses. And in many ways, we had to meld a lot of the Apple simplicity and elegance into it. And Nutanix created probably, hundreds, if not more than 1,000 millionaires. And a lot of that is owed to this passion for building computer software, really having this, a real interest that was kindled back in 93, 94 when Dr. Sanghi joined IIT Kanpur. So thank you so much, Dr. Sanghi, for helping kindle that interest in me. And thank you, Manish and Navya as well for really inviting me here. I'm honored to be, addressing the PEC students and alums. I was just looking back at 1921 and like, what really happened in the year 1921? What does this 100 years actually tell us? And I was just looking at Wikipedia about 1921 India. And I realized a few things had happened in that year. I mean, you go back, the Emperor of India was still George V. The Viceroy was the Earl of Reading. And some important things were happening. Obviously the country was brewing and it wanted to get out of, the clutches of the British. The Prince of Wales, who later became King Edward VIII, had arrived in India in Mumbai. And there were widespread agitation, mass protests about how they need to leave India and such. And he was greeted with empty streets. It was a non-violent movement, but empty streets. Such was the passion for the Indians to actually have self-rule. And finally, the Madras province declared to the judgment of women that they had the right to vote in British India. So obviously we've come a long way since then. I think 2021 is a new year, obviously a very sobering year to begin with because of what 2020 went through. And I figured I'll talk about my own heroes, people that I've learned from, because all of you at some point or the other will need heroes. And I figured there's nothing better than telling you how I think and how I memorize and remember stuff. It's because I have these vignettes and they're all cached in my memory somewhere or the other. It's these videos, it's these, very strong quotes from people. And I invoke them every once in a while because that's the way you think on, first principles. And you need to have these culture principles to really make these tough decisions in life because there's always trade-offs in life. So I'm going to really play on these vignettes and I'm going to, because I believe in the power of three, I'm going to talk about three of those. So with that, let me start with this. I hope the technology gods cooperate because I'm going to be streaming some videos on Zoom. So let me share my deck with all of you. And Manish, let me know if you can see the deck. Can you see the deck?
Yes, I can see that.
Okay, so I'm going to go to the play mode here and really talk about my lessons from career and company building and learning with the heroes, like who are the heroes that I learned from. By the way, that's my Twitter handle. I'm fortunate to still have a Twitter handle, unlike some other people who were asked to give up their Twitter handle because of their behavior. But really coming and talking about career. So what's career? It's really an infinite game. And I was thinking about people who I really admire. And these are people that obviously they've achieved a lot. So it's cliche to say that, you look up to them. But think about Warren Buffett, 90% of his success, of his wealth, really came between the years 65 and 90, when he was between the age of 65 and 90. And Charles Munger is very similar. Dianne Feinstein, last 25 years, she's defined politics in the US, coming from the Democratic seat in California as a senator. But many of these people, they have not peaked, and they want to continue to actually go do bigger and better things. And this brings me to this idea of what the infinite game of the career is, of anybody's career. You might think that you're in your 20s, have you peaked? A lot of my college friends actually peaked when they were in college. And many people went on to peak in their 20s, many people peaked in their 30s. But the ones who actually look at this as a marathon are the ones who really compound year after year after year. One of my favorite authors, James Clear, has written a great book called Atomic Habits. And he talks about this in a very subtle way. He says you should be far more concerned with your current trajectory than with your current results. So we'll talk about some of this over the course of the next 20 minutes or so. And make sure I get this right because the arrow is actually missing. I need to make sure I see the video. Yeah, it's here. So yeah, let's talk about the Infinite Game. One of my favorite authors, again, my heroes, is Simon Sinek. I'm sure many of you have actually watched his videos on YouTube. Great TED speaker. One of his biggest talks is about why. Start with why. And this is one of my favorite culture principles as well. Most of the world is focused on the what. And there's probably a handful of people, maybe 1% or less of the people, who really start with why. And then from there, they go to how before they really land on the what. If somebody had told me when I was graduating that I should start most things with why, I'd probably have been a much better person in my 20s and my 30s. And even till today, I think the practice of really looking at the why before you get to the what is really, really important. Simon also talks about leadership a lot. And I've learned a lot from his YouTube videos. So I encourage all of you to watch his video on the biochemistry of leadership. He talks about endorphins and dopamines and serotonins and oxytocin. And that video is why leaders eat last. And finally, he's written a great book on the Infinite Game, which I think will be, for all of you who are graduating or even in your younger years at PEC, you should really read the book because it will tell you about what peaking means and how you have to make sure you don't peak in your 30s or your 40s or your 50s. Keep going on, because people like Warren Buffett, as I said, they became 10x people between the years 65 and 90. One of my other authors, again, that I really think a lot about, and I talk about this with any group of people I work with, is James Clear. He's written, again, a very good book called Atomic Habits. Again, the idea is of compounding. He says how habits are the compound interest of self-improvement. And as you can see from the right, he talks about the power of tiny gains. And while it's actually rhetorical to talk about 1% improvement every day, but you can see how 1% improvement every day for the whole year makes you 37 times better, almost 38 times better, which is powerful. And 1% worse every day, brings you to 1/33 of who you were at the beginning of the year. I mean, such a powerful idea of compound interest that can be applied to life. And you don't have to be 1% better every day. You can be 1% better every week or every month, and you'll still have immense improvements at the end of the year. I wish somebody had told me about the power of compound interest. Of course, we all learn compound interest when we're in school, but to really apply that to our lives is a very powerful idea that we all should think about in this infinite game of career. Now, this person, Alex Honnold, I'm sure some of you have heard of him. He's one of my heroes. Whenever I lose conviction, or I need more discipline, or I need to actually invoke and show grit, I think of people like Alex Honnold. And this is a video. I'm going to show you a 2-minute vignette of this, but all of you, I encourage you to go watch this documentary on Netflix or somewhere. But it talks about how he pushes the boundaries to really go achieve bigger and better things. So let's take a watch. It's a 2+ minute video. It's a snippet. It's a trailer of the documentary. But the goal here is for you folks to leave this talk and go and watch this documentary about the life of Alex Honnold. So let's see, 1 second. I need to make sure can I exit here? Let me just make sure the volume is shared. I'm gonna make sure that I share the volume from the computer as well. Okay, Manish, can you see this again?
We can see it. I'll let you know if we can hear the audio as well.
Okay, I'm keeping my fingers crossed.
The audio is good.
Does it feel different to be up there without a rope?
It's obviously like much higher consequence.
People who know a little bit about climbing, they're like, oh, he's totally safe. And then people who really know exactly what he's doing are freaked out.
I've thought about all cap like for years, and every year I'm like, that's really scary. I'll never be content unless I at least put in the effort. El Cap is the most impressive wall on Earth.
It's 3,200 feet of sheer granite. It's the center of the rock climbing universe.
Obviously, I get interview questions about it all the time. Oh, would you like to do that? And you're like, yes, for sure.
So you're a girlfriend now, I heard.
It was awesome. Pretty much makes life better in every way.
It's really hard for me to grasp why he wants this. But if he doesn't do this stuff, he'd regret it.
Everybody who has made free soloing a big part of their life is dead now.
I haven't been injured in like 7 years. I suddenly start getting injured all the time.
What if something happens? What if I don't see him again?
I could just walk away, but it's like, I don't want to.
I've always been conflicted about shooting a film about free soloing just because it's so dangerous. It's hard to not imagine your friend falling through the frame to his death.
I think when he's free soloing, that's when he feels the most alive, most everything. How can you even think about taking that away from somebody?
No mistakes tomorrow.
I'm starting to get kind of psyched.
If you're pushing the edge, eventually you find the edge.
I can't believe you guys are actually gonna watch. Hey Jimmy, do you copy? Just started climbing.
So this is on YouTube, and it's every time I watch this documentary, it's about a couple of hours. It just gives me the goosebumps. I'm sure as all of you watch this, you will realize the power of what it means to have conviction and discipline and atomic habits that make you better, which I think in all our lives, even I just turned 45 this August, and I feel like I'm only beginning to understand what it means to really make that compound interest possible for self-improvement. And I love one of his sayings, like, if you're pushing the edge, eventually you'll find the edge. I wish, again, somebody had told me when I was graduating what it means to push the edge. And the term atomic habits, it's such a powerful term, such a tiny term, but such a powerful term of that 1% improvement with practice and practice and more practice. So this is the second value, the second vignette I'm going to talk about. And it's very important in my life because of how my mom really has been a big part of my life. And especially in the early years, I came to the US when I was 22, and I'd never taken a flight till I was 22. And the first time I took a flight was when I was flying from the US, from India to US. And there was so much that I saw what it meant to be tenacious in my mom in those 22 years. And obviously now we have our twin girls, and we have an elder boy, but we have twin girls, and we are passionate about them going and doing things as well as men could. It's very important to us that we really talk about egalitarianism to our son as he grows up. He's 10 right now, but also to our daughters about what the art of possible is for girls, rather than being in the stereotype of these are the jobs for girls and these are the jobs for boys. We're so passionate that we've really started to think about purpose and philanthropy. My wife and I, we just created a graduate fellowship at UT Austin, a Department of Computer Science, and it's for women in AI. AI is something that I'm learning a lot about, but I'm like, how do we really triangulate our passion with what we believe society should look like, and workplace should look like, and so on. So I'm going to play another vignette, which again gives me this constant reminder about what equity means in life. And there's a great saying here, as you can see: Verna Myers talks about diversity being invited to the party, but inclusion is being asked to dance, both of which are very, very important. So here is a little story which really gives me, again, goosebumps when I think about the power of women in our society.
November 4, 1962. The Argentinian Grand Prix begins. One of the world's toughest races, attracting the world's toughest men. The race with a history of death and crashes. Out of all the cars, only 43 drivers made it to the end. And one of those drivers made history. The first driver to beat the record speed at 126 kilometers per hour. The first driver to finish 3 hours before everyone. And the first driver to prove women could win the Grand Prix. Me, Evie Rosqvist. They say I could never finish. So I finished first.
Hair raising. And again, I hope all of you really imbibe the story behind the video about the art of possible and look around, companionship and think about what Evie said. They said I could never finish, so I finished first. And it's really important for our workplace, for our social setup to be a place. I mean, now in places like California, now there are laws coming about public boards having, just and equitable representation of women as well. And I hope it actually traverses from here. And in fact, in some countries, it's even better. I think the fact that we don't have a woman president in the US, well, in India, we've had country leaders, who were women. This tells you how much we need to still achieve from 1921, which is exactly 100 years, ago, when women were allowed to vote in British India, and in 1920, when women were allowed to vote in the US, because before that, there was no adult suffrage for women in the US. Now, the word inclusion is something else. This is and not just inviting them to a party, but really asking them for a dance. And I want to tell a personal story at Nutanix. I really had to think hard about this. Not to say that I couldn't have done better, because every day you have to continue to improve and think about inclusion. But as I was retiring from Nutanix, the kind of stories I heard about what I'd actually helped engender in the culture. One of this is an example from LinkedIn of one of my favorite leaders at Nutanix, who was the Deputy General Counsel, who wrote this. And I really liked a few things that I saw here about the encouragement for us to be fearless, which is so important for women to actually be at workplace and be fearless. And she made me a better leader as well, Olive. She says, you made me a better attorney, but I think I made myself a better leader because of leaders like Olive, working next to me. And by the way, this picture is from NASDAQ when we went public, and 90% of the women are still working for Nutanix. The staying power that they give, the constancy of emotions that they bring is just extremely powerful. And I think it's important for all of you to really realize that too, as you go start your journey. This is another one, I never called her my EA. Venus has been a very important part of my Nutanix life for over 7.5 years. And she wrote this, and it was so humbling and just honoring to actually have seen this on LinkedIn from her. When she said adventure of a lifetime, with many more years of memories, she's going to be a friend forever for me. And when she talks about her gratitude, I'm equally grateful that without her, I wouldn't have come this far. And in fact, that's how I responded to her. She was my mom away from my mom. She taught me balance, because I would travel a lot. I was putting like 300,000 miles on global services, United Global Services. And she would talk about headquarters and field and between people and process and work and life. I think women leaders like her made Nutanix more than anybody else. So I want you all to remember this, that, this idea of diversity and inclusion is going to make for a really differentiated, anything you do. I'm sure many of you will go and start companies. It's important to think about what equality and egalitarianism actually mean in your workplace as well. And this is my last vignette. Again, 2020 was a very, very humbling and a very sober and a very somber year for humankind. But along the way, there was a silver lining, which was discovery of, as it says, a story of the most important scientific discovery of the 21st century. And had my career to start at the cusp of this new thing, which is really at the confluence of computer science and biochemistry and ethics and human history, it would have really shaken me up to think about, what do I want to do when I graduate? So again, take a watch and we'll talk more. This is another very important documentary. It's worth about 2 hours on Netflix. So watch it after you've gone from the session.
Mother Nature gave us something that's richer than our imagination.
We saw a very peculiar pattern.
Never seen anything like this before.
I remember him saying, remember this word, CRISPR.
We've never had the ability to change the fundamental chemical nature of who we are, and now we do. And what do we do with that?
David's doctor told me, just hold on, there's something coming.
You can actually use CRISPR to change DNA. You can actually do it.
We could engineer a single gene that could potentially make us all more muscular. But should we make that universally available?
Что человек может создавать человека, человек, который может воевать без страха и без боли. И вот то, о чем я сейчас сказал, может быть страшнее ядерной бомбы.
Should we really be manipulating the heredity of future generations given our lack of knowledge about so many things?
I don't know where you draw the line between not having albinism and deciding your kid needs to be an extra foot taller so they can be a good oarsman and go to Yale. Where is that line? Who's going to draw that?
Anything that will stop my child from suffering, I'm for.
You know, draw this ethical line wherever you want, but don't draw it in front of my disease.
What does that mean for this science, where we have the capacity to edit in some things that we think are important? Are we playing God?
You don't realize it's disruptive until you look backward. Often you don't realize that you're in the middle of a revolution until after the revolution has occurred.
Yeah, I'm taking a deep breath because it's that breathtaking. And I'll leave you with more questions after this session than answers, because these are really important questions. Because we're getting into this realm of science where questions will be asked, are we playing God? And there are no easy answers to this because there's two sides of this equation. You heard one of the fathers talk about how he'd love for his son to not have this blood transfusion every 6 weeks because he had sickle cell anemia, which CRISPR can solve. Again, it's a 2-hour watch. Please watch it if you really care for this session. If you're watching this session, I'm sure you go and watch the documentary, because if I were graduating in 2021, I'd be thinking really hard about CRISPR. Now, I think I'm too old to go and start something on CRISPR, but as we think about investments and life sciences, because I'm going to passionately read about life sciences going forward as well, there's a lot that can be done with at least the peripheral vision and being an investor in all things life sciences, especially around CRISPR. And the things that we just saw in the last year with messenger RNA and how you could create vaccines over the weekend. Once they were able to come up with the genetic code of the virus, it didn't take more than a couple of days for Moderna to come up with a vaccine. That's the power that's in front of you as you graduate from college and really think hard about what do you want to do. Do you want to be just a software engineer, or do you want to be a software engineer who's at the cusp of biochemistry and biology? I think it's a fascinating field to really go do something over the course of the next 30, 40 years. And it'll help you ask this question: how does this once in 100-year pandemic change your why? It changed my why. I mean, I took a step back last year and said, what really matters? What do I want to do in the next 15, 20 years? And it gave me some immense answers. I took a pause and I thought hard about, do I want to fly 300,000 miles a year, going selling products and talking to customers face to face, or do you want to do something that's more scalable? And that's the reason why I think you all should think hard about how does this once in 100-year pandemic change your why? So I want to summarize, 3 values, 3 vignettes: grit, equity, and ethical curiosity. These are the pillars that you should think about, the trifectas of an infinite career game. 2 of which are going to be videos for you. It's homework. Each of them is worth about an hour and a half to 2 hours. But I think it could be life-changing if you were to watch what it means to have atomic habits and discipline, and knowing what it means to peak. Maybe in your 90s when you peak. If you live long enough, we'll have amazing amounts of compound interest. And knowing how we don't play God, and yet we go and save lives, is really one of the most influential things to happen with CRISPR. So with that, I want to thank you all for your patient ears. I really appreciate the fact that PEC gave me a chance to talk to everybody here. Take care of yourself and take care of each other. Manish, back to you.
All right. Thank you so much, Dheeraj. Fascinating slides and fascinating videos. I'm sure that all of us are going to relish that homework that you have given us, and all these thoughts that you have shared with us. We have some questions from people, and some of the questions are actually more general, not just pertaining to the specific areas that you have focused on, but also things that people are curious to learn from you, given your experience. And what I'm going to do is I'm, going to sort of go through the questions, rephrase them slightly, making them a little more broad so that, more people can relate to it. So the first question that we have is from Akshit Singla. And I'm just rephrasing it slightly. It's about balance. And, I've heard you speak about balance in many ways, not just work-life balance, but even when you are building company, the balance between, product and sales, the balance between sales and marketing, the balance between front end and back end. Even I've heard you talk about that. So the broader question here is like, how important is balance in life? And how do you make sure that as you go around building your career in times, which are very competitive and, where it's not easy to shine because, there's so much competition, there's so much deception. How do you make sure that, you don't end up losing your personal life completely in pursuit of a career? So if you could just share your thoughts on that, please.
No, I think it's first of all, thank you, Akshit, for the question. Balance is elusive, and it's been one of my very sort of important things that I've thought about a lot. I use the word paradox more than the balance, because it's opposites that you need to balance. And when you have to balance the opposites, it becomes a paradox. They're kind of 2 sides of the same coin, and you look this side with your peripheral vision, you see this side and you see this other side. And the higher up you go in life, the tighter the rope becomes and the higher the rope goes. So now you have to really do a tightrope walk, where if you lean too much towards one side, you'll fall. And that imagery is pretty stark in my head. In fact, the bigger the leader you become, the bigger the responsibility, because the repercussions of falling are that much. You're basically gonna, kill yourself if you fly from that, if you fall from that high. And it becomes a spectacle for everybody. So it's really important to understand paradoxes. In fact, it's such a favorite topic of mine, this idea of trade-offs and paradoxes. In computer science, we talk about you can only get 2 out of the 3. There's a CAP theorem that says to get 2 out of the 3. But in life, I think there's 2 things that you got to balance. And if you overdo one, you're basically done. That I actually wrote about this in one of my favorite, again, one of my heroes is Dr. Brené Brown, who has written a lot about vulnerability. Her books are like Dare to Lead and Daring Greatly. So one of her books, Dare to Lead, I've written a couple of pages on paradox. That, leadership is about really balancing a sequence of opposites. Things like optimism and paranoia. You got to have both of them in equal measure as you're really becoming an entrepreneur, because if you're too optimistic, you basically become all about ambition and there's not enough attention to detail. So optimism, paranoia, ambition, attention to detail. One of my favorite books is Andy Grove's book, Only the Paranoid Survive. And he talks about these opposites. One of his chapters, chapter 7, is Let Chaos Reign. With a G, so R-E-I-G-N, reign. And then the next chapter is Reign in Chaos. This is the reign without the G, R-E-I-N, reign in chaos. And you need to do both when you're building a company. You need to let chaos reign, because otherwise you're too strict and you're too controlling and you're too much of an autocrat. All of you will someday lead teams, and you got to figure out how to let chaos reign and then reign in chaos. And there's tons of other opposites I can talk about. When I talk about sales and marketing, they're not opposites, but it's really about getting the left brain and the right brain figured out. And most things in life are a combination of and a balance of left brain and the right brain. So I'll also talk about one of my favorite New York Times article, which is about leadership. And they go and survey like some really successful CEOs. And one of the biggest things actually there's 2 things to talk about, which are really good traits of great CEOs. One of them is about this fact that leadership is about balancing opposites. You're eternally schizophrenic about 2 things, optimism and paranoia at the same time. And the other thing that they talk about, the great CEOs, their traits is how whatever they do it so well that they're not constantly selling themselves for the next job, for the next promotion, because it comes to them naturally, actually. So yeah, I think paradoxes are very important. The word paradox, I talk about every day. And I'll probably go and post this on LinkedIn one more, this page from Dr. Brené Brown's book that talks about leadership being a balance of opposites.
Thank you so much. So there's a question from Vikram Mondal, which is about failure. Now, I've heard you speak about, in terms of making decisions, like the worst case is not bad enough. And I guess the way Vikram is sort of phrasing his question, it looks like that, he's worried about like a fatal failure. So the question is like, how do you deal with failure in something which comes only once in your lifetime? So if you could share your thoughts around that, and especially your framework, because I've really loved, the way that you have spoken about making big decisions in your life. I think that will be really helpful for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, going back to my usual practice, I'll give you 2 more homeworks. 2 movies to watch, 2 of my favorite movies. They're probably the best movies of my life because they just have so much of the trials and tribulations of decision-making and tough decision-making. When you're at the brink, the precipice, and you might think there's nothing, is when life pulls you back and you get answers. So One of them is called The Post. And it is about the CEO of The Post, who basically, she's the widow of the CEO who passes away, and everybody is basically poo-pooing her about how the Washington, because they get access to the Watergate scandal details. And it's the same week that Washington Post is going to go public. And Meryl Streep plays the protagonist of the CEO of Washington Post. And it will give you a lot of learnings about what it means to really make tough decisions, and what failure and how you really extract success from failure, in many ways. And my second most favorite movie is Darkest Hour, Winston Churchill, World War II, of how Britain was at the precipice of defeat. And again, both of these should be available either on Apple or on Netflix for all of you. Watch these two movies and it'll tell you about life. In fact, I don't agree with Winston Churchill in everything he did, but one of his very important quotes, which again, I keep very near and dear to me, is when he says, "Success is not final. Failure is not fatal. It's the courage to continue that counts." So really, really important. Again, you repeat it to yourself. Success is not final. Failure is not fatal. It's the courage to continue that counts. And you see that in test matches all day long. You have these, different sessions every day. I mean, today we didn't have the best day today, but hopefully it'll come back in the next couple of days. I think it's a marathon, and you've got to really look at it that way. And decision making comes down to people who really breathe well. I've learned to breathe better in life. If you folks go and Google for this person, Paul Ekman, he's a psychologist who's done a lot of research on, human emotions and lying and breath meditation, breathing. So in 2008, I had a long commute back then. It was almost an hour worth of a commute, and I tuned my radio on, and one of my favorite channels is NPR, National Public Radio, and the local radio station was playing this program called KQED Forum. And Forum, again, the anchor of Forum is Michael Krasny, and he had brought Paul Ekman for this thing. And Paul starts talking about his interactions with the Dalai Lama. You'd spend like tens of hours with the Dalai Lama, just this notion of human emotions and how he's not angry with China, but he definitely believes there's so much that needs to be done to really heal the people of Tibet. But there's like a 3-4 minute segment about breath meditation. And I was driving and this hit me hard. This is the 2008 program, and it hit me hard what he said. He said, breathing is the most automatic behavior in our lives. So if you can control breathing, you can control almost any automatic behavior in your life, including impulses and anger and impulsive decision making. And I constantly remember this, that if you can really control breathing, you can control most things in life. Because when you're sitting in meetings, and many of you will have animated discussions, you're going to have heated discussions all day long. All you got to do is take a step back and take a deep breath. Because then you know that you're in control of your most automatic behavior, and every other automatic behavior actually can be controlled. And I think it's worked wonders for me in the last 10 years. I used to be relatively hot-headed 15, 20 years ago. And I think how I've actually taken control of myself and become more mindful, comes back to my understanding of my breathing. So I hope that all of you can actually think about breath meditation. Maybe even go take a listen, search for Paul Ekman, EKMAN, KQED 2008. You'll get this really amazing radio broadcast of Michael Krasny.
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing that perspective. So what I'm going to do now is to synthesize one question out of two questions. One is from Sanket Singh and one is from Mayank Batra. essentially they're asking, like, sometimes it's a little easy to sort of be influenced by what others think. Like, how do you make sure that your own sort of true north, your why, is not influenced by what's the sort of prevailing consensus about, what kind of career you should go after? So the question is, like, how do you find that inner sort of compass that guides you towards that why?
Yeah, it's a very profound question. Conviction has to come from within. You saw Alex Honnold really be convicted of his beliefs, of how you needed to do this free solo, which is really, nobody in the world has ever done free solo on El Capitan. And what I wanted all of you to take away from that video was exactly that your why is extremely yours. It's very personal. And no one else can even relate to it as much as you can. There was this popular video on WhatsApp that was, traveling around in the last week on Couple Day. A couple was, doing a stand-up interview of his own life, and it's very a lively person. I didn't realize how lively he was until I watched that video on WhatsApp. And he talks about this, that look, he was so passionate about playing, and he played all sorts of sports simply because he wasn't that interested in studies. But whatever he did with so much passion. Today we really look up to people like Sachin and Virat and everybody else. But there was a difference between Sachin and Vinod Kambli. I mean, many of you probably, if you're a Gen Z, you might not know who Vinod Kambli is, but Vinod Kambli was more promising than Sachin Tendulkar. But one of them had discipline and had more grit and knew that he was in control of his emotions, while the other wasn't. So even though Vinod was more talented, what really won over time was the latter, Sachin, who, I mean, I think a triple century eluded him forever. Vinod Kambli had 2 triple centuries back to back when he was like 19 or 20 or something like that. So remember this, that your why, if you have the conviction, you've got to really layer on top discipline and grit and conviction to really take it to where you want it to be.
All right. So I'm going to use this opportunity to ask a question myself from you, Dheeraj, and I really want to take advantage of your experience of having spent a lot of your time in India, especially in your formative years, and then having spent more than 2 decades in the US, and especially in the Silicon Valley in the last 1.5 decades or so. So if there was one value or sort of one thing that you could magically export from Silicon Valley or even maybe from America, that you could make sure that everyone in India will be able to imbibe that, what would that value be? And by the same token, if there's one value that you could magically import from India, for people, like, what would that value be?
So let's start with the latter. I think India saw women leadership a lot sooner than America has seen women leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And this country has still not been able to break the sound barrier in some sense, for women to have a woman president. I think that's something we can learn from the East, India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, countries like that, about what it means to be led, for the whole country to be led by a woman leader. I think US can learn from that. What India can learn from the US, especially Silicon Valley, I think it's attention to detail. This is Steve Jobs' sort of way of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And in Silicon Valley, there is immense amounts of Darwinism. Like, there is 10,000 saplings and 99% die. Only 1% survive. So only 1% become plants. And out of that 1%, only 1% become trees. And out of that 1%, only 1% becomes sequoia trees that last for, so long. And sequoia trees, as some of you know, last for thousands of years. That Darwinism comes back to attention to detail. It's this empathy for the customer that I think the best companies in Silicon Valley do really well, and the fluffy ones don't. So you see Darwinism all day long in the survival of the fittest and such. And we started to see that in Bangalore a lot. I think this notion of customer empathy is coming in Flipkart and others who are now competing with Amazon, which is all about customers king and so on. So I think the global competitive landscape, and as India continues to stay open for global companies to come and compete in, I think that attention to detail is definitely something that's extremely, I would say, American Darwinistic capitalistic phenomenon that I think would do well. And you can see that in many companies in India that have survived and thrived, like the Tatas have done that well. And the reason why they've survived and thrived is because they understand empathy better than most of the company.
All right. There's a question from Loveleen, who's interested in learning a little bit around the history of Nutanix. She's asked specifically about the name, like how did the name come to you? But I guess what you could do is maybe just share with us a little bit more about the founding journey, like what led you to found the startup, especially because you were already working in a startup which was pretty promising as well. So how did you kind of come to the decision of founding a startup, and specifically like what made you choose the name Nutanix?
Yeah, I think working for some other startup is a great hunting ground to know about yourself. So those 2 years before I co-founded Nutanix with two of my co-founders, I really learned a lot about myself. Who am I? What kind of decisions do I want to make? Do I think I can make better decisions? This self-image, self-awareness really came in those 2 years. And there was this level of impatience to go and try out some of the gut calls that I was willing to make. And there was a lot to lose because, and obviously we hadn't started a family yet. My wife and I were married for 9 years. I had worked for others for 9-10 years by this time. But the itch within me was to really go and do something and really chase autonomy. Again, one of my favorite authors is Dan Pink. He's written a very popular book called Drive, and some of you might have actually read it. He talks about 3 pillars of drive or motivation. Money is not the primary pillar of motivation or drive. If you do everything well, like the best painters and players and musicians and artists, they never chase money. Money comes as a side effect of these 3 things: autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And autonomy was really fresh in my mind when we started this company, Nutanix. The 3 of us, we knew each other for a while. And we were passionate about distributed systems, as I was saying early on. And at the same time, the consumer cloud was doing something unique. The way they were building systems and computer systems and infrastructure, we thought we could bring a lot of that to everybody and democratize the consumer cloud technology for everybody. But the real challenge was ease of use, because when you bring these big commodity-driven consolidation, commodity-driven, because commodity servers, commodity hardware was driving consumer cloud's data center architecture. And to bring all of that to the masses meant you had to really package it well and think of it like Apple. The way Apple thought about iOS and iPhone, we had to really bring a lot of those parallels to our product. So I started to learn a lot about Apple. I mean, honestly, I hadn't cared to follow Steve Jobs until he passed away. And my sort of respect for him and my true conviction for design has only gotten better every year since he passed away. I mean, our company was 2 years old when he passed away, but now I understand a little bit of human empathy, of what it means to really make for frictionless experience for customers and employees, because employees are also your customers. I think that drove a lot of the early decisions at Nutanix. Like, how do you really bring the Apple-like consumer grade thinking, the empathy that Apple has, and this idea of distributed systems, the way consumer cloud companies are thinking about pay as you grow and the cloud architecture. It was a hard problem. And in the first 3 years, we nearly died 3 times. It all looks like a straight line, especially for a bystander sitting on the outside. But as I mentioned before, what Churchill said, success is not final. Failure is not fatal. It's the courage to continue that counts. And that's what makes up for great companies. Nutanix is worth $7 billion right now. But I think if you look at what it could do in the next 3 to 5 years, could be a whole lot more. And what many companies that have gone to build 50, 100, 200, $500 billion market cap, it's really about staying power. So really bringing that to yourself and to the people around, and a lot of it comes down to customers and being subservient to your customers. I mean, I think that's one thing that the best companies, especially in the US, have done well, is around being subservient to the customers.
Absolutely. So I'm slightly conscious of the time. Do we have a hard stop in another 3 minutes, or do we have time to go over by 5-10 minutes?
This is 11 p.m. my time, so I
Yes.
can't even come up with an excuse of a back-to-back meeting after this.
All right. So maybe I'll ask a couple more questions, combining some that we have received from viewers. So you have obviously achieved a lot in your life, but there must be things which you still want to achieve, like in terms of goals that drive you. So that's one question that we have from Ujjwal. And then another one, which is kind of related, like having achieved so many things in life, what is it that scares you? Like, are there any things that you are sort of scared of losing, or maybe scared of not having? This is a question from Abhinav.
Yeah, my wife and I, we think a lot. We're married for 20 years. We just finished our 20th marriage anniversary. Been in the Bay Area for 20 years now. And the last 10 years, building the company, it was such a monomaniacal focus on one thing and one thing only. In fact, in 2009, I asked one of my cousins, who's also one of my heroes, about should I postpone having a family, like, having kids, because I'm going to start this company. And he said, you'll be a better father. You'll be a better entrepreneur if you become a father. And that stuck with me. I'm like, oh, it's not a zero-sum game that either I can have a company or I can have a family. And I learned patience even more so because of kids and really being able to sit and reason with them and so on. I worry whether I will be a good father or not, because, we grew up in adversity, and adversity drove us for something. When I was flying from India to the US, I had a fellowship in the university, but we didn't have enough money to pay for my flight ticket to the US. So Jane Tata Endowment and Casey Mahindra Education Trust, they actually gave me $3,000, and I bought a ticket for $1,000, left $1,000 with my parents, and came here with $900. That adversity defined me. And there were many people around me that actually, around my family, around our family, who helped us a lot, 10, 15 years of monetary help every month. I don't see that adversity with our children. So I worry whether they actually will be as convicted, as gritty as we were, or we came to become, because we had something to prove. There was this hunger and humility that I want to make sure that he grows up to be a hungry, humble, honest kid. I see honesty in him. I think time will tell how humble and honest he actually becomes and stays. And finally, how much heart he has. One of the things I think about is, again, I've been monomaniacally focused on business and business building and career building and all this stuff. At some point, you have to really go and think about, okay, what's the purpose of life? How do you really help society and all this stuff? And right now I'm 45. I'm like, okay, the next 10, 15 years, I'm still going to be extremely focused on business and investments and things of that nature. But what do you want to do at 60? Because people are living longer now. So you need to think about 60 to 75. What's the purpose? So I'm thinking about those things. And I just want to make sure I don't mess up 45 to 55 in the next 10 years. By the way, when you cross 45, you start thinking chunks of 10 and maybe 15. And I'd love to actually live 60 to 75 to go and do something even more meaningful. And that becomes purpose of using technology and using my passion. Because a lot of us, we actually, one of the reasons for me doing business and building a company was honestly because I liked being liked. It's very, very important. And leadership is such a paradox because many a time you don't want to be liked being liked because you have to make tough decisions, including with people. But when you like being loved by your customers and your employees, and when they come back and say, thank you for creating generational wealth for me, I think that is the mission for building a company. And I think if you want to extend this 100x, 1000x, you cannot do this by building a company. You have to go and do this with society and so on. So I think about purpose, and I hope I actually do justice to some of this stuff in the next 10, 15 years and beyond as well.
Thanks, Dheeraj. So this is the final question from me. You are great at sharing your life's experiences in a way that we can all learn from it, and you have had very interesting sort of experiences in different kinds of places and many things that people can learn from. Do you ever think about writing an autobiography? And if so, what title would that be?
I don't think I have experienced enough, but I am stashing away a lot of my experiences. And I don't know if I deserve to even have a book around myself. It's a little conceited to even think of an autobiography for somebody who is this small and has, I look up to people like Bill Gates and Warren Buffett and Charles Munger and all these people, Steve Jobs, and even Elon Musk these days for some things and not for other things. But I'm like, look at how much they've done, and yet they're probably all incomplete. I want to be different than them because I need to think about how our children actually become people with these kind of values, and what do I do at 60 and all these things. So it's a different me, but I'm stashing a lot of my experiences in videos and pictures. And if you look at my Apple photos, it's full of these albums that I'm organizing, quotable quotes, the book blurbs, and I'm stashing it away in my head. I'm a very visual thinker and also a very visual memorizer. So I have decade, 2010, 2020, 2000, 2010, you go up, you get to 1990, 2000. So you can actually go up in a library and you can pick up 1985 and say, what do you remember from 85? And I think it's really, really telling. And I say this because I believe in this really important quote, by the way: the more things change, the more they remain the same. So you got to really invoke history in a lot of what you do. So I'm stashing a lot of that history. I remember a lot of history. I read a lot of history. And hopefully someday when there's time for myself, I'll probably go and put it out in book or articles, or I currently don't even have time to go blog because I'm thinking about the next 10 years because I'm learning so much about artificial intelligence and design and the developer community and all that. So there's a lot to actually do, but maybe someday.
All right, Dheeraj, thanks a lot for that. I guess we are out of time, although we would love to continue, but we are very respectful of your time, Dheeraj. It's pretty late in your part of the world. So thank you so much for your time. It's been a very, very enriching session for all of us at PEC, for all the viewers on YouTube who are watching this live. And we are extremely grateful to you for your generosity with time, as well as sharing some of the thoughts, which really come from your heart. We can feel that as you speak those. So thank you so much. With that, I'll pass it on back to Dr. Bansal for any final comments that she may have. Thank you.
Thank you, by the way. I really appreciate your patience last 1 hour, Manish, and for really doing it with elan and so much, I would say, grasp of everything around. And I'm just equally honored and humbled to be in this session. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dheeraj. We as faculty members are very lucky and privileged because we learn a lot from so many people like you. Every year we have a bunch of smart people around us, and the students always think that they are learning from us, but that's really not true. We learn a lot from you, and not only we learn from you, while you are there in the campus, we keep learning from you throughout the life. And the kind of discussions that we have had with people like you has been absolutely amazing, and really, I think we have become better teachers and better human beings because of people like you. And thank you very much for accepting our invitation. We're really grateful to you.
And just before I forget, the 4 movies everybody has to watch. It starts with Free Solo, Human Nature, Darkest Hour,
The Post.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone.